Well, I think the white paper is focusing on the fact that a lot of Australians, about 50% of Australians, are actually feeling financial stress. And how does it actually affect their well-being? 85% of those people find that it actually does affect their well-being. So very, very much about financial fitness. So the question is, what do you do about it? How do you attack that? I think the message would be that you need to figure out, first of all, that it's making you uncomfortable. Then you need to stop, have a look at it, figure out where you're spending, be a bit shocked by it, and then figure out your plan to attack it so you can reach your goal.
What are the major factors, do you think, that are causing us to have this problem with our financial confidence?
Well, there's a group about just under 30% that actually spend more than they earn, so they are automatically, obviously, in deep stress. Then you have a group of people, it's about 40% of Australians who are a little bit, they're embarrassed by the level of debt that they've got, and then another portion is actually secretive about the level of debt that they've got. Now that's actually going to cause concern. Those things always end up coming out, so that is going to be causing them a deep amount of stress. The other thing that came out in the paper was that we're not necessarily willing to curtail our spending when it comes to keeping up with the Joneses. So that's actually one of the things that I think that we are going to have to figure out how to deal with that. It's very difficult in this environment when you're seeing on Facebook or you're seeing on Instagram and all these other social media, everyone seems to have everything and be able to do it very simply. And so I think people are spending money trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Do you think the situation has worsened thanks to the advent of buy now, pay later services?
No, I don't have any stats on that, but definitely the anecdotal evidence is there that people find it very, very easy to tap into buy now, pay later.
So you mentioned there that that there's a whole lot of people who are spending more than they earn, and I imagine that there's even more that are not saving anything right now. Given the numbers that you were just talking about, 1/3, 1/4 of people, it sounds like a bit of a looming crisis here. Is that how you see it?
I think it is a crisis, but it doesn't have to be. I think what will happen is you get scared enough to where you actually stop and say, I've got to deal with this. So it's the emotional response to, it's time to do something about this. I need to figure out what my goal is, how much am I spending, and where is it that I can save money. I think sometimes it has to get bad enough to get stopped. And the reality is some people can't do it on their own. They may need to go ask for help. They may need to go talk to an advisor. There's a lot of advisors that do cash flow coaching. If your financial goal is to buy a home, you might want to go and visit your mortgage broker, and they might be able to help you set up a savings plan that hits you to hit a deposit or make sure that your spending is in the right space to apply for a loan. Or you may need to go and speak to a broker about consolidating your debts. If you don't think you can do it yourself, there are people out there who can help you.
What about the demographics here? Women and men, young versus old, who is most concerned about their finances?
No, it wasn't really. We found that women were more concerned about their finances. That doesn't surprise me as a female. And we found that some of the younger demographics were spending more to keep up with the Joneses. And I think they're ones that are probably more affected by social media. So I could see my children, yes, doing that.
Yeah. And before I move on from that, so much of our household wealth is based around, dual incomes and what we know about our partners. It was interesting in this report that there may not be the full understanding between partnerships that we sort of thought. Do you think that that's an important thing to create awareness around?
Well, it's interesting because if we go back to the bit about being secret, and if 1/3 of the Australians are being secretive about their debt and they're not sharing their position with their partner, the concept that actually is a sustainable position is crazy, number one. Number two, if you do have a financial goal together where you'd like to, say, buy a home, the banks, it will come out in all the reviews of the banks. So if that is your goal, you definitely need to have your discussions with your partner and put all of your financial issues out on the table before you start to go for a loan, because the banks really do a deep dive into your expenses these days, and things will not be hidden.
Financial advice in Australia is an interesting one because we've had so much bad press about it in the last 12 months. How do you see financial advice to be perceived among Australians?
Well, that's a difficult one to answer because I do think that people have been rocked in their trust in large financial institutions. Throughout the Royal Commission, you had some stories come out that were, in everyone's opinion, were just appalling. And it's very hard to take that in and then go back and deal with that institution, so I think that is hard. But I would hate for the Australian public to now use this as an excuse not to ask for help if they needed it. The reality is there are great financial advisors out there. There are great mortgage brokers. There are other kinds of advisors out there for you that will help you do a great job and that can help you reach your financial goals. They're not there. They're not all out there to take advantage of you.
Do you have any other kind of tips or pieces of advice that have been brought up through this research as to what people can do if they do find themselves being overwhelmed by their finances?
I really think you just have to, you got to go back to basics. You have to stop and figure out what you're spending. There are ways to spend less. You don't have to stop what you're doing, but maybe you can do it cheaper. Renegotiate, go back and ask for a lower insurance rate. Go change your mobile plan. Look at your energy plan. These things just take time and effort, and that's really what people don't want to do. And then maybe after you've renegotiated a few things, maybe you say, okay, well, maybe holiday once every 2 years, not every year. The main thing, I think, is if you set yourself a goal and you have a reason for going through that pain of analyzing all your expenses, it's much more palatable if you're doing it for a goal. So I think if you set the goal first and then work through your expenses and then keep looking at it and working at it. And again, if you can't do it on your own, ask for help.
More broadly, and looking at the landscape, do you think that these ultra-low interest rates that we have now are overwhelmingly positive for Australians, or do they bring with them a layer of complexity that needs to be examined too?
I think it's positive. If we were having this discussion 18 months ago, I would have said to you, if the people watching your show have an interest rate on their mortgage that starts with a 4, they need to go talk to a broker. Now we have banks on our panel that are under 3.3%. So it is a big change. It is a real opportunity for people to find that best, what we were just talking about. Go renegotiate the things that are big in your life. Go renegotiate your mortgage rate. Ask for help. Get that lower. Take that money, that extra money, and invest it in something that interests you or that you want, or pay off your mortgage faster. It's a real opportunity, actually, for many consumers to actually get to their financial goal faster. So I see it all as positive.
Got some tentative positive signs in the property market too when it comes to things like clearance rates and maybe just a little bit higher on price. How are you noting the situation? Is it filtering through into the mortgage market immediately?
So we've got low interest rates. We've had tax changes that came off the table when the election results were resolved. We have property prices that had been falling that are now falling very, very slightly, leveling out. So all the pieces of the puzzle are there to see a recovery in the property market and to see some recovery in the economy. I think it'll take about 3 to 6 months to work its way actually into the statistics so we can actually see it.
So a little bit of time.
But I'm very positive.
This week we've seen a major capability review into APRA. What have you made of the report?
Well, first of all, I think it's excellent that they did it so quickly. So you spent a year taking a deep dive into our major institutions. I think it's really important that you also take a look at the regulatory structures, because the whole thing makes up the financial services sector. And you're not going to get a return of trust from the consumer unless the entire sector is firing. So I think that's the most important thing. The second thing is, it may have been very harsh in its criticism, but I do believe that if it leads to a more transparent regulatory environment so that we can understand how APRA's working and how the banks are being regulated, again, it will go towards returning trust. So I'm all for it, and I'm also for anything that pays a little bit more attention to super. Super is getting to be a bigger and bigger and bigger part of our world, and I think it's really important that that sector in particular, that's your money and is my money, is well run and well governed.
Do you think that the public has a right to know about the risk levels in its major financial institutions? Should that information be made public?
I do think that they do, and I have a hesitancy in my voice because these things are actually really complicated, and I think that public has a right to know and to understand how these institutions are regulated, but I also think that they need to allow the experts to do it, and I think they need to understand that there's enough governance in place that those experts are doing the right thing.